Three names were erased from the streets of Chicago, but their shadows never left. Raheem, Ortega, Bobby. Most fans saw them fall and moved on. But what if these men were not just casualties? What if their downfall was the reason Tommy Egan's rise became possible? This is not just about death. This is about how power quietly changes hands. Raheem was never meant to be the king of Chicago. But he was dangerous because he believed he could be. He ruled his corner with fear, quick decisions, and street respect. When Tommy first arrived in Chicago, Raheem saw him as a problem, not a partner. That was his first mistake. Raheem thought Chicago played by old rules, where territory mattered more than strategy. But Tommy did not come to claim a block. He came to break systems. Raheem's power was loud, but it was shallow. His soldiers feared him, but they did not trust him. His enemies watched him closely, waiting for him to slip. When Raheem moved against Tommy, he believed brute force would be enough. He did not understand that Tommy thrives in chaos. Raheem's death was not just the end of a man, it was the end of the illusion that Chicago's streets were stable. The moment Raheem fell, everyone felt it. Crews started moving differently. Alliances became weak. Fear spread faster than loyalty. Raheem was the first crack in the wall, and once that wall cracked, it was never going to stand again. Raheem's fall sent a clear message across Chicago. The rules had changed. This was not New York. This was not a slow game of respect and warnings. This was sudden, brutal, and final. His death told every crew that no one was too loud to be silenced. It also showed that Tommy was not just passing through. He was willing to end anyone who stood in his way. After Raheem was gone, smaller crews panicked. Some tried to rise too fast. Others hid and waited. This confusion created space, and space in the drug game is deadly. Raheem unknowingly opened doors for people like the Ortega family and operators like Bobby to step forward. But that space also gave Tommy room to study everyone. Raheem did not just lose his life. He destabilized the city. His absence forced others to make moves before they were ready. And rushed moves always come with mistakes. That is how empires begin to fall. Raheem had to be the first to fall because he represented the past. He was loud, direct, and confident in old street logic. As long as someone like Raheem existed, Chicago still believed it could control outsiders. His death shattered that belief. Tommy needed the city to fear him before it could respect him. Raheem gave him that chance. Raheem underestimated silence. He underestimated patience. He underestimated someone who had already survived New York. In Power Book 4, Force, Raheem's role was not to win, but to warn. His end was the opening chapter of a bigger story. One where power is taken, not announced. Once Raheem was gone, everyone else became vulnerable. They just did not know it yet. Even after Raheem was gone, his impact remained. Every gun pulled too fast. Every deal rushed. Every betrayal that followed traced back to his death. He taught Chicago that strength without vision leads to destruction. He showed that being feared is not the same as being protected. Raheem's legacy is not his territory or his crew. His legacy is chaos, and in that chaos, new players rose, old families fought harder. And men like Bobby thought they could survive by staying quiet. But the truth is simple. Once Raheem fell, the city was already bleeding. Tommy did not start the war, Raheem did. Tommy just knew how to finish it. The Ortega family was a force in Chicago that few dared to challenge openly. And like Raheem, who ruled with fear, the Ortegas operated like a machine, organized, strategic, and patient. Their influence ran deeper than just street corners. They had connections, intelligence, and a code that made outsiders respect them, even if they didn't like them. At first glance, they seemed untouchable. But their greatest strength was also their weakness, pride. The Ortegas believed their family name and history could shield them from chaos. They underestimated how quickly the city could turn against them. When Tommy arrived, he didn't just bring a threat, he brought unpredictability. The Ortegas were used to dealing with threats they could see and predict. Tommy was none of that. He forced them into decisions they weren't ready to make, exposing cracks in their unity. Every move the Ortegas made after Raheem's fall was cautious, calculated, but ultimately reactive. Their pride demanded they respond to challenges openly, even when silence would have been smarter. When conflicts with other crews escalated, their code didn't allow compromise, and their reputation didn't let them back down. This rigidity became their downfall. Tommy didn't have to fight them all at once, he just needed them to make mistakes, and the Ortegas did exactly that. At the core, the Ortega family was about survival, but survival in their world required loyalty above all else. When some family members hesitated, when alliances wavered, and when fear began to spread, cracks appeared in their seemingly unbreakable armor. Their enemies noticed these cracks immediately. Bobby, Raheem's remaining connections, and other street players saw opportunity. Chaos is contagious, and the Ortegas, for all their planning, could not contain it. As Tommy manipulated the shifting landscape, he used the Ortegas' pride against them. Every move he made pushed them further into risky territory. They were no longer the hunters, they became reactive, always one step behind. Their strict code, once their greatest shield, became a cage. Decisions made in anger and stubbornness instead of strategy accelerated their downfall. The Ortega's story is not just about power. It's about the cost of loyalty and the danger of underestimating outsiders. Their influence still lingers in Chicago, but the lessons of their fall are clear. Control is fleeting, and no empire lasts when pride overshadows prudence. By the time their cracks were visible, Tommy had already studied their patterns, learned their weaknesses, and waited for the perfect moment to strike, even after their decline. The Ortega family left a mark that would shape the city for years. New players were careful to respect their legacy, alliances shifted to avoid their mistakes, and the streets remembered the price of underestimating those who seem untouchable. The Ortegas were not just a family, they were a lesson in the delicate balance between power and ego. Every character that followed in the game of force would be judged against the shadow the Ortegas left behind. Their downfall was not sudden, it was built on years of pride, rigid loyalty, and refusal to adapt. By the time Tommy Egan moved decisively, the Ortegas were trapped by their own choices. They were powerful, yes, but in the world of Power Book 4, force power without flexibility is a weakness. Their story serves as a warning. In Chicago, survival favors those who bend, not those who break in the name of honor. Bobby was the kind of man who believed the rules of survival in Chicago didn't apply to him. Quiet, calculated, and seemingly untouchable, he operated behind the scenes, thinking that keeping his head down and avoiding unnecessary attention would keep him alive. But in Power Book 4, force, quiet doesn't mean safe, and staying in the shadows can sometimes put you right in the line of fire. Bobby's downfall was not about brute force, it was about misjudgment, misplaced trust, and underestimating the chaos swirling around him. And like Raheem, who led with fear, or the Ortegas, who ran on pride and family codes, Bobby relied on invisibility. He watched, waited, and thought every decision was under his control. But control in Chicago is an illusion. Street power shifts like sand, and no one stays grounded for long. Bobby's strategy was simple: avoid conflict, protect his corner, and let others fight while he stayed untouched. At first, it seemed to work. He avoided Raheem's attention, bypassed the Ortega's confrontations, and kept himself out of Tommy's immediate radar. But safety in this city is temporary, and the city doesn't forgive complacency. Bobby's first mistake was trusting patterns. He believed the street had predictable cycles and that by understanding them, he could anticipate threats. But Tommy didn't follow patterns. Every move he made disrupted the status quo, forcing Bobby into decisions he had never prepared for. Slowly, alliances Bobby counted on began to crumble. Some flipped when it was convenient, others fell under Tommy's influence. The world Bobby had studied for years no longer existed, and he was forced to react instead of act. The second mistake Bobby made was underestimating loyalty. He assumed that as long as he paid the right people or kept his silence, no one would target him directly. But loyalty in Chicago is transactional, not permanent. When a crew senses weakness, even hidden weakness, it doesn't wait. Bobby's connections were exposed. Deals went south. Messages were misread. And every small misstep brought him closer to a situation he could not escape in the streets. Invisibility is not power, it's vulnerability in disguise. Bobby's downfall became inevitable when he miscalculated Tommy's patience. He assumed Tommy was too busy dismantling Raheem's and the Ortegas' influence to notice someone like him, but Tommy's approach was meticulous. He studied Bobby's movements, traced his alliances, and understood that eliminating someone quiet but connected was as important as confronting loud enemies. Bobby's calm demeanor and apparent detachment made him a prime target because he represented hidden threats. Those who operate in silence often carry the sharpest knives. Even as Bobby tried to adapt, it was too late. The chaos created by Raheem's fall and the Ortega's missteps had already set the Bobby's story is a lesson in false security. It's not enough to be quiet, smart, or strategic. The streets demand awareness, timing, and the ability to bend without breaking. His downfall was not about strength or courage. It was about failing. To recognize that survival requires adaptability. By the time Tommy moved against him, Bobby realized too late that being safe is an illusion. Every quiet corner in Chicago can hide a threat, and every man who believes he is untouchable will eventually pay the price. Bobby's legacy is cautionary. His choices, his reliance on invisibility, and his misreading of the game shaped the environment Tommy thrived in. In the aftermath, the streets remembered him not as a king, but as a man who underestimated the rules of the game. And in Power Book 4, Force, underestimation is fatal. His fall opened doors, created chaos, and solidified Tommy's rise, proving once again that in Chicago, survival belongs not to the quietest, but to the smartest and the ruthless. In Chicago, nothing happens in isolation. Raheem's fall, the Ortega family's pride, and Bobby's miscalculations were not separate stories. They were threads woven into the same deadly tapestry. Fans often see these characters as individuals, but in reality, their actions created a chain reaction that shaped the city's criminal landscape. This is the pack theory, the idea that these three men, in their own ways, were pieces of a puzzle, each movement setting the stage for the next, all leading to Tommy Egan's rise. Raheem's death created the first tremor. His corner went silent, his crew scattered, and his enemies began to test boundaries. That void didn't just attract opportunists, it forced every other player to react. The Ortegas, sensing a shift in the city's balance, tried to assert their dominance, filling spaces Raheem had left. But their pride blinded them. They reacted too aggressively in some areas, hesitated in others, and made calculated moves in places where caution would have been smarter. Every decision the Ortegas made rippled through Chicago, impacting Bobby and the rest of the underworld. Bobby, who had been quietly observing, thought he could navigate the chaos safely. He assumed Raheem's death and the Ortegas' movements were distant events, disconnected from his world, but they were not. Each mistake by Raheem and the Ortegas narrowed the gaps in the city's power structure, and Bobby's hidden corners began to shrink. Every alliance he relied on became fragile because the city itself was shifting. The pack theory shows that their downfalls were connected not by design, but by consequence. Every small event sent waves across the streets, and Tommy was watching every ripple. Tommy Egan did not create the chaos, he exploited it. By the time the Ortegas overextended themselves and Bobby misjudged the situation, the city had already been destabilized by Raheem's removal. Tommy moved like a surgeon, cutting precisely where the structure was weakest. The pack theory demonstrates that Raheem, the Ortegas, and Bobby were not merely victims, they were catalysts. Their falls created opportunities for him to consolidate power quickly, taking advantage of missteps that would have been harmless under normal circumstances. Understanding the pack theory also reveals the hidden intelligence of Power Book 4, Force, The show is not just about street battles. It's about interconnected consequences. A death in one corner of the city isn't an isolated event. It changes alliances, breeds paranoia, and shifts control without anyone realizing it immediately. Raheem's aggression, the Ortegas' pride, and Bobby's quiet strategy all collided in a way that left the streets fractured and vulnerable. Tommy's ability to see these connections gave him a decisive edge over others who only saw individual players, not the ecosystem they created together. The pack theory also explains why Tommy doesn't just eliminate threats, he studies them. Every move by Raheem, the Ortegas, or Bobby became data points. Their patterns, mistakes, and reactions formed a blueprint for Tommy's actions. By understanding how these three stories intertwined, he could predict reactions, exploit weaknesses, and navigate the city with precision. It's not just survival, it's strategy built on observation. Raheem's impulsive violence, the Ortega's prideful stubbornness, and Bobby's overconfidence all fed into a single, larger system that Tommy learned to manipulate perfectly. Even after each man was gone, their stories continued to influence the city. Other crews and operators now moved differently, trying to avoid the same mistakes. Chicago's streets were forever altered by the pack's invisible threads connecting their choices. Tommy's rise was only possible because of the vacuum they created and the chaos they propagated. Their individual downfalls were chapters of a single narrative, a narrative that proves one thing: in Chicago, nothing exists in isolation, and power is always built on the consequences of others' errors. The pack theory is more than just a connection between three men. It's the foundation of Tommy Egan's empire, Raheem's aggression, the Ortega's pride, and Bobby's complacency were pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, reveal the truth behind the city's power shifts. Understanding it gives a new perspective. These men weren't just enemies or obstacles. They were part of a system, a necessary chain of events that allowed a single man to rise above them all. Enforce every action, every misstep, and every choice is linked, proving that power doesn't happen by chance. It's engineered through the chaos others create. Tommy Egan didn't just step into Chicago, he capitalized on a city already unbalanced by the falls of Raheem, the Ortegas, and Bobby. Unlike them, he didn't let pride, fear, or false security dictate his moves. He watched, he analyzed, he waited for the perfect moment to strike, and when it came, he didn't hesitate. The chaos left behind by the pack was his playground, and unlike the others, he understood that survival and power aren't given, they're taken. Often in ways the city's players don't even notice until it's too late. Raheem's aggression, which once threatened the streets, had left gaps that Tommy exploited immediately. Neighborhoods that were once contested became vulnerable, crews were divided by fear, and alliances started to crumble. Tommy's strength wasn't just in his firepower, it was in timing. Every misstep by Raheem created an opening. Every act of pride by the Ortegas forced them into predictable patterns. Even Bobby's overconfidence became a tool Tommy used to anticipate where resistance would falter. By the time he acted, the stage was perfectly set. Tommy didn't create the storm, he rode it, steering it where he needed it to go. What set Tommy apart was his ability to think several moves ahead. Where Raheem and the Ortegas reacted impulsively, Tommy planned. He could predict the domino effect that the pack's mistakes would cause. Each fallen player wasn't just a casualty, they were part of a chain reaction that Tommy understood fully. He moved quietly at first, watching reactions, mapping loyalties, and identifying weaknesses. By the time others realized the landscape had changed, he had already shifted control in subtle ways. Deals restructured, alliances redirected, and threats neutralized without drawing attention. Tommy's rise wasn't just about eliminating enemies, it was about seizing opportunity. Chicago is a city where power is never stable. Every death, betrayal, or miscalculation changes the balance. Tommy's genius lies in recognizing those moments and acting decisively. Raheem's death created fear. The Ortega's pride caused hesitation. Bobby's hidden missteps allowed blind spots. He turned every single one of these events into a Stepping stone. While others struggled to maintain their hold, Tommy expanded his influence quietly but methodically, proving that power isn't about noise, it's about precision. Another key factor in Tommy's rise was perception. He understood that fear and respect are currency on the streets. Raheem ruled with intimidation, but it was volatile. The Ortegas relied on legacy and family honor, but that made them predictable. Bobby counted on invisibility, but that left him exposed. Tommy combined these elements. He commanded fear when necessary, exploited legacies when convenient, and stayed unseen until the perfect strike. The result was a level of control the city hadn't seen before, all built on the mistakes of those who came before him. By the time Tommy solidified his position, the city itself had changed. Crews and operators learned to move differently, territories shifted, and the balance of power favored those who could adapt. Tommy's rise was a lesson in opportunism, patience, and strategy. He didn't just inherit the chaos left by Raheem, the Ortegas, and Bobby. He engineered it in a way that made his enemies complicit in their own downfall. Every miscalculation they made, every choice driven by pride, fear, or arrogance, became fuel for his ascent. The culmination of Tommy's rise proves one unbreakable truth in Chicago: power favors the calculate, the patient, and the ruthless. Raheem, the Ortegas, and Bobby were all pieces of a puzzle, and their actions created a roadmap that Tommy followed flawlessly by exploiting their weaknesses, capitalizing on chaos, and moving decisively. He transformed the city's fractured streets into his domain. In Power Book 4, Force, Survival is Not Enough, Tommy Egan shows that true power is forged through understanding, manipulation, and seizing every opportunity the mistakes of others provide. If you want, I can now write Section 6 Final Thoughts, Chicago after the pack, completing the full script with the same detailed, unique 4,000-character style for your faceless video. Do you want me to do that next?